Okay. So, sorry, I'm just trying to figure it out. In this section, we're going to talk about both solving and graphing absolute values. So we're going to start with solving. So evaluate each absolute value. If A is -2, B is -3, C is 2, D is 2.1, E is 3, and F is -4.2. So first thing that you are going to want to do is input all of your values into the parentheses or for your variables. So I'm going to keep my absolute values black just so that we can kind of tell the difference and they don't look like ones to confuse us. So 2. And then when they're right next to each other, remember that means multiply. So times 2.1 plus what F is, which is -4.2. Then we'll put our absolute value bar plus 2 times whatever E is, which that is 3. Okay, so back in the introduction, we said that we had to do what is inside the absolute values first. So 2 times 2.1 is 4.2. And then we have plus a -4.2, or that's just -4.2. And then plus 2 times 3. So 4.2 minus 4.2 is just 0. And now that we're done with everything in here, we can do this out here. So 2 times 3 is 6. Now, the absolute value bar makes everything positive. So because this isn't a negative, it will just stay 0 plus 6, which just ends up equaling 6. Okay. Okay, so let's try number 2. So 4 times A, which is -2, minus our absolute value of 3 times whatever B is, so that's -3, plus 2 times C, which is 2, and our absolute value. So we need to do what's inside the absolute value first. So 3 times -3 is -9. And 2 times 2 is 4. Now -9 plus 4 is -5. Okay, so now we're done with everything in here. So we can do what's out here now. So 4 times -2 is -8 minus. Now, the absolute value bars make everything positive. So because this is -5, that's going to change to a +5. But it's -8 minus 5, which is -13. So back in the introduction, we said that you can't have a negative. Well, that's only for the stuff that is inside the absolute value. So because this is already negative and then we're subtracting from it again, it's just going to make it a bigger negative number. So you can have negative answers, you're just not going to have a negative come out and still be negative. Okay. So I want you to do number 3 on your own. But then let's go ahead and do number 4. So again, first thing that we want to do is plug in our values for our variables. So B was -3 and C was 2. So we need to do everything inside the absolute value first. So 3 times -3 is -9, minus 8 times 2 is 16. And then -9 minus 16 is a -25. Okay, so now everything is done inside the absolute value bars. So we've got a 3. Now, this is going to act just like parentheses would, and we would multiply these two together, but we have to change this to a positive first because it's alone in the absolute value, which means that this is now positive 25 minus 3. So 3 times 25 is 75, minus 3 is 72. So the big thing is not to distribute this into the parentheses first. You want to make sure that everything in there is positive before you do that, or else you're going to mess up. Okay, so go ahead and do number 5 on your own. Okay. So when you're solving for an absolute value, equation, you must first write 2 equations and then solve both of them. Okay? And then always make sure that the absolute value part is by itself before writing the 2 equations that must be solved. Okay, so that means that we need to get the absolute value by itself before we can make the 2 equations. So you're going to do your opposite order of operations that you did before. So if you've got your parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, and subtract. So you're going to go opposite. So you're going to start here and work your way up. So we need to do the adding and subtracting stuff first. So I'm going to subtract 4 to both sides first. And then what you would normally do if this was parentheses is you would multiply this in there. So the inverse of multiply, as we already should know, is divide. Because remember, we are still trying to get this part right here all by itself, and it's not yet. We have to get rid of this 2 out front. Okay, so now we are all by ourselves. So now we can make our 2 equations. So your first equation is you are just going to drop the bars and call it good. So it's going to be the 3x minus 2 equals 7. Easy enough. And then your second one is going to be your 3x minus 2 equals a negative 7. So the opposite. And the reason why we make 2 equations is, remember, it is the distance away from 0. So we don't know if that distance was on the positive side of the number line or on the negative side. So we have to solve for both situations because we don't know which one it was originally. And after you get this all by itself, here, let's put that here. You can't have any negatives. So it can't equal a negative. If it does, that means that it is no solution. But this was positive, so we are allowed to do that. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and solve these. So again, we would do opposite order of operations. So add the 2 to both sides. And divide by 3. So x equals 3. And we need to do that to this side too. So you're going to end up doing the same steps, but you're going to end up with a different answer. So it's negative 5, divide by 3. So x equals negative 5 thirds, or that is a negative 1.6 repeating. Okay. So let's try this again. So first, we need to check to make sure that our absolute value bars are by themselves. So there's nothing before or after the bars, which there is not. So we can just go ahead and make our 2 equations. So one, we just drop the bars and call it good. And the second one, we drop the bars and then change it to a negative on the other side of the equal sign. And then solve. So I'm going to add 8. Then divide by 2. And then I'm going to add 8 over here as well. And divide by 2. So x equals 1. Okay, so go ahead and try number 2 on your own. Okay, for Number 3. Okay, so again, we want to make sure that this is by itself, which it is. But see how this equals a negative? So this is actually a no solution one because it's this right here. This can't equal a negative, so it would be no solution. You don't have to put this every time, but I just want to reiterate that it can't equal a negative. Okay. Okay, and then number 4. So first, I need to get my absolute value all by itself, which this one is not. So we need to do that first. So I'm going to start by adding 3 to both sides because opposite order of operations. 8 plus 3 is 11. Now we're going to divide by 2. So absolute value of x equals 5.5. Okay, so now that we're done with that, we just need to make our 2 equations. So the first one, you just drop the bars and call it good. And the second one, you drop the bars and change what is on the other side to a negative. Now this was a nice one because it's already done for us. So those are our 2 answers and there's nothing more that we need to do. Awesome. Okay. Okay, so some story problems for us. Write an absolute value for each situation and then solve it. So number 5 here. For a company to invest in a product, they must believe they will receive a 12% return on their investment plus or minus 3%. So this plus or minus is one word or one phrase for absolute value. Okay. Okay, so a company to invest in a product, they must believe that they will receive a 12% return on their investment. So on their investment, meaning that, or a return on their investment. So if you return it, that is money that the company is giving back because you're returning it. So you would have to give that money back. So x minus, now this is a percent, so we would need to change that to a decimal, and I do that by moving that decimal point 2 places to the left. So 0.12 equals plus or minus our 3%. So again, I need to move that 2 decimal places, so that's going to be 0.03. Now our absolute value is all by itself, so I don't need to get it all by itself first. It's already there. So I can just make my 2 equations. So the first one, we just drop our bars and call it good. And then our second equation, we drop the bars and change it to a negative 0.03. So understand the plus or the minus, so the positive and the negative, the 3%, that's where that comes from. So here I'm going to add the 12, or the 0.12. So x equals 0.15. Then add the 12, or the 0.12. So that the x equals 0.09. Okay. So the temperature of an enclosure for a pet snake should be about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take 5 degrees. So give or take is that plus or minus. So should have our absolute value. And what's in your parentheses should always be minus whatever. That might also help. So x minus, so it's the temperature of the overall temperature of the enclosure has to be at least 80 degrees, and then give or take your 5 degrees. So again, I need to make sure that this is all by itself, which it is. So I can go ahead and make my two equations. So x minus 80 equals 5. And then the second one, I drop the bars and make it a negative. So first I'm going to add the 80. So x equals 85. And then again, add the 80. And these are degrees, so we should have our degree symbol on there. So the temperature of the enclosure for the pet snake should be about 80 degrees, give or take 5 degrees. So it could be 5 degrees warmer, which would give us the 85, or 5 degrees lower, which would give us the 75. So anywhere between that range of 10. Okay. So I'm going to save the graphing for the next video just because I think that that is a lot to kind of go over in one video. So I'm going to make this a second video.